Welcome to the Thriving Children podcast, the show that helps parents and teachers to put the magic back in child development. Here's your host, Clare Crew.
This is episode 122 of the Thriving Children podcast, and I'm Clare Crew. In today's episode, I'm chatting to Pediatric OT Angela Hanscom. Welcome to the show, Angela.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I feel very, very lucky that you're committing to have this conversation because I read your brilliant book earlier this year, Balanced and Barefoot. Absolutely adored it. I feel like we're very much on the same page. And I thought we might start with where you started in the book, talking about that initial alarm that you felt with the huge number of children you were seeing who had uncoordinated bodies, low resilience, and poor sensory tolerance. What exactly were you seeing in the children?
Sure. I started actually in a outpatient therapy clinic setting, so a sensory gym, and I noticed that children were having trouble with interesting sensory issues like not liking wind in their face. Another one was, not wanting to get their hands dirty is an issue that keeps coming up over and over. And the number one issue that has to be treated nowadays in clinic settings is balance. So kids are starting to fall a lot in schools. But that was something that was really alarming. And I was sitting in a lecture one time, and this lady was talking about how she goes, we don't see kids rolling down hills that much anymore. And so this is something that we have to really pay attention to. So that was my first instance of where I started recognizing that there was an issue here. And then when a child was not tolerating wind in his face, I kept thinking, how do I treat that in a clinic setting? Because, I was trying to brainstorm, do I get a fan and blow it in his face? And it just felt very unnatural. And so I started thinking about that as well. Finally, my daughter came to visit in the clinic setting, and she was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 at the time, my oldest daughter. Her arousal level, and, she's not a very hyperactive child. She just is pretty even keel outside. There's no issues. But when she went in the clinic setting, our clinic setting was very brightly colored. There was plastic everywhere, plastic ball pit. All the mats on the walls were primary colors, bright red, bright yellow, bright orange. And when she came in, she jumped in that ball pit and started throwing balls all around the clinic. And then her arousal level escalated. She just got very almost hyper and jumping from one piece of equipment to the next. And 2 therapists came running in saying, we need to put her in the squeeze machine. And so they were trying to squeeze her and roll her through that to give her deep pressure to calm her down. And I was thinking, here we are, I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and our profession we're supposed to be experts in the world of sensory and organizing the senses so kids can learn. And I was thinking, this environment is overwhelming to my daughter's senses. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me, for not only our profession, but also recognizing that there were some really interesting sensory issues that were going on in children.
Yeah, and that absolutely makes sense in regards to what you talk about in the book, in that nature provides that just right sensory environment, because obviously in your clinic setting, that was meant to be an environment that was meeting the sensory needs of the children and clearly didn't. And there's a lot of, autism-friendly play gyms and things like that are starting to crop up, which is great in some ways. But I agree with you. You can't really beat nature.
Yeah, exactly. And, the more I started observing children playing outside and then kind of comparing that to what we're doing in a clinic setting, the more I realized that there was great potential to the world outdoors, the sensory component especially. For instance, looking at plastic balance beam that we use in the clinic, we engineer sensory experiences And the balance beams are like $200 or $300, and they're plastic little bumps on them. And if you've ever walked on them, they don't feel very good on your feet, but that is something that we would treat for, touch awareness, or having children be able to tolerate walking on different textures. And when I observed children outdoors and I looked at, logs, like children walking on a log per se, and you look at the sensations they get walking on that, where first of all, the senses are constantly changing as they walk along the log, but also all the other stuff that happens. For instance, a child, as they start walking, that log might move. It's dynamic, and so it's challenging the senses more. There might be other children playing around them, so there's a social component. There's wind. All of a sudden, they feel a breeze. They feel sunshine. They hear birds tweeting. So there's a lot of senses coming at them at once that helps with that organization. And when you try to replicate that indoors, you're just never going to meet the sensory needs in the same way that you would outdoors.
Yeah. And so I think you've become incredibly well known for your book, but also you're really well known, Angela, for being the founder of Nook. So this is really, a nature-based developmental program which has moved, I believe, from the woods behind your house to many different locations around the world. So perhaps you can share a little bit about it. How is the program structured, or maybe not structured? Well, I can't speak. Structured or not structured. And also, how does it look and feel to a newcomer coming along to one of those Nook sessions?
Sure. So the program has definitely evolved over the years, but it started in my backyard as an experiment for my own children. It was something that I recognized that there really wasn't children playing outdoors as much. And so it was just something that I thought would be fun to do. And I did my first 3 weeks of summer camp because someone had recommended doing that because that the parents would be more likely to drop children off. So it really funny. I mean, it's funny to look back at it, but it was a marketing ploy, to get more children. But it happened for a reason, because what happened is we started this program in the form of a summer camp. So there was no expectations. There was no we need to do this in a class format or in a school where there's very limited time, especially in America, to do outdoor play. Mm-hmm. So we had the luxury of that time and space. And so what we saw over the years is when children were given plenty of time and space for outdoor play experiences, it changes the game. We saw changes in development in just a week's time with these children. So really what it is we use the environment to inspire higher levels of play. And combine that with rich sensory experiences. We're looking at really influencing their development on many levels, from low level balance to sensory integration to higher level creative thinking, problem solving, that sort of thing. So each day starts with a play experience, and every time's different. And then they have hours of free play. So they take it to new levels, or they might play something totally different. And that's okay. A big part of our philosophy is adults step back, but tune in. So they are there for safety, but they really do, they're pretty hidden out there if you walk around our woods, and allow the children to come up with their own solutions to problems and their own play ideas. And that's something that's very different than most camp or program environments.
Yeah, whereas, that whole idea of summer camp, that's for us in Australia, that's quite a new idea. That's a bit more of something that happens in America. But I still know what you mean. We have something called vacation care for in the school holidays, and it's very structured, and it's, it's advertised based on, okay, this is the excursion that we're going to do on this day, and these are the craft activities we're going to do, and, maybe even these are the sensory experiences that we're going to do. But it's, children are boinging from one adult directed task to another, and there's some free choice within that, but there are not big chunks of undirected adult time, which is something else that you really talk about a lot in the book, just that importance of having unrestricted play. So how would you suggest that we can support that to happen within the school day, but also as parents within a home setting?
Sure. So in a school setting, I've been really advocating for extending their recess time. Here in America, especially, our recess is 15 minutes to 20 minutes, and the children are sitting for, the research is saying, about 9 hours a day. And that's including school and at home as well. But they're really sedentary. And 20 minutes is just not long enough to jump into play schemes. They really are just figuring out who they're going to play with, what they're going to play, and the bell will ring. And so children, they're smart and they know, okay, I don't have time to do imaginatory type play or more deeper social play. So they'll often play games like tag or play in the play structure. And the other issue with 20-minute recess sessions is it takes time to regulate that activity level. So let's say a child is sitting for hours, they start to get antsy. And so their activity level, their arousal level goes up. And then you let them out. When you start moving, that activity level actually gets higher. And so if you let them into 20 minutes, they're more hyper than before. And so teachers are noticing that, are frustrated and saying, okay, why bother with recess? Because now the kids are off the roof and they're dysregulated. So, but it really does take more time. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour for them to regulate their activity level back down again so they can pay attention. So I always recommend at least an hour for recess, at least once a day. And then the other thing is when children go home, they really should carve out time for just free play. Sports are very big right now everywhere, and they're great. But when they become all consuming and the only thing the children do, it takes away from that free play where kids can come up with their own play ideas and move the body in ways that their neurological systems should be moving. So if they want to spin in circles for a minute, they can do that and not get in trouble. Or if they want to dig in the dirt and have some downtime, that as well. So they really do need to move in different ways and have that freedom every day. So my recommendation in general is at least 3 hours of outdoor play every day.
Yeah, and that's huge. Like in the book, you talk about different ages requiring different amounts. There are so many children not getting as much as that. And I think we are luckier in Australia in that there's usually a lunch play period within the school day, which is about 40 minutes. And then there's also a recess time, which is 15 to 20 minutes. In some schools, they do tend to cut that down in areas where they feel that children don't know how to play, which they're the children that need to play even more. But I found it really interesting in your book talking about the fact that it does often take 45 minutes to an hour to get into that state of deep play, because even that then isn't long enough. And it makes sense as to why sometimes playtimes can be quite dysfunctional. And as a teacher on yard duty, there's lots of issues. But I think part of that is also just because there's so many ridiculous rules. So even if the playtime is substantially long enough, you know, so often they're not even allowed to pick up and play with sticks.
Yep.
Yeah, it just gets a little bit crazy. Do you find, you know, I know that my children, you know, they don't actually do any sports or anything, which seems a bit odd when people ask us. They're quite surprised that they don't do many extracurricular activities, but I just really value that active free play after school, and we've got a big yard where that can happen. Do you find that some children who come along to Timber Nook, who have quite structured lives within the school day and also perhaps after school and on weekends, do they struggle to make that shift into such a child-directed world? Yes,
it actually, not as long as you would think. It does take practice, but there are more and more children that are coming to Timber Nook that don't know how to play. So they might do fine with the play experiences when there's the environmental props and the inspiration. But when it comes to free play, some of the kids are struggling with that. But what we found is that over the course of the week with practice and the way that our program is developed and set up, each play experiences gives them new affordances and new opportunities to think about using loose parts in different ways. It's also set up where there's mixed ages out there. So the other children are part of the environment and it inspires the kids to play in different ways. So the other children are also models for them. So it's kind of like the perfect recipe for children if they haven't had an opportunity to play, to come to a program like Timber Nook where there's so much inspiration all at once. It's for a good amount of time that we do see change, but it takes a lot of practice and not being quick to give them ideas. So that's a whole mindset shift for the adults. So we do have a lot of kids in the beginning of Timber Nook. If they're new, they'll come up to us and say, what do I do next? And we'll put it back on them and say, well, whatever you want to do. And so it just takes time and practice for both the adults and for the children.
But then hopefully, yeah, as you were saying, a few days into that, you start to probably both gain more confidence in doing that, as opposed to feeling like we need to rescue the children.
Right.
Yeah. Boredom is not such a bad thing after all.
No, it's very good.
So nature is clearly at the center of everything that you do, Angela. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but perhaps we can dive more deeply into why it's so crucial for our children to get outside.
Sure. Well, there's in nature or just outdoor play in general, or both?
Oh, yeah, perhaps both, because obviously, I feel so much more rejuvenated when I've been in a very sort of natural space as opposed to, a man-made outdoor environment. But
Sure.
It's not always realistic to be, surrounded completely in nature. So even just for people to get out in their backyards or the park down the road, even if that's just, a paved area, it's not as ideal as being in the woods or being at the beach, but it's still better than being inside our four walls all the time.
Right. So there's definitely benefits to simply just playing outdoors. So I'll start with that, and then I'll add in the nature component. So one of the most, I guess, fundamental reasons why outdoor play is really important is the movement piece. And that's a piece I talk a lot about, but it is very critical and it's something we got to pay attention to. And that's with that we're, restricting children's movement a lot. And that's where we're seeing a huge rise in sensory issues. So children really need to move their bodies in all different directions and rapidly. They actually need acceleration where they're spinning or they're going upside down or they're jumping off things, moving in ways that actually might make adults gasp a little bit because that actually helps develop and organize the senses. So that's the first thing. And what happens is inside the inner ears, there's fluid, and that fluid needs to move back and forth through that movement. So it stimulates the hair cells and develops our vestibular system. That sense is key to all the other senses, and it helps to organize the senses. It supports all 6 eye muscles for reading and writing. It helps us know where our body is in space so that we can be safe when we navigate our environment. It turns the brain on to pay attention in school, and it helps to regulate emotions and to regulate activity level again. So that is really important, and that's a key component to outdoor play. So when you're playing outdoors, you have much more space and you have the freedom to move your body in more extreme ways that if you were inside, you'll hear, don't spin or don't, obviously you don't want them jumping off furniture. So that's one big component to play outdoors in general. Then when you go into nature, you get even more benefits. So you just think, you hear bird sounds, especially Australia. I feel like you guys have such a range in bird sounds over there. And so it's so good for spatial awareness for children because what they do is they orient themselves to the sounds around them. So they might hear a bird sound to the right and then one behind them and then one in front. And what they're doing is they're orienting their body to the sounds around them. So that helps with spatial awareness. And then you have many synapses firing in the brain because you have multiple senses engaged at one time. And so that leads to that organization. The reason why we want organization of the senses is because in order to even learn, we have to have a brain that's organized. If you feel hyperactive or if like noises are really distracting to you or you don't feel comfortable in your own skin, it's very hard to learn. So we do want that organization from an early age. And before age 7 is really such a critical age for kids to be playing outdoors and working on those skills. The other thing is, like, let's think about one more thing. Like digging in the dirt is a great example. A lot of kids are not liking getting messy. They don't want the hands to get dirty. Well, if let's say a child is digging in the dirt, they're getting their light touch, that light touch feeling when you're touching the dirt. Some of the kids will find that very aversive, but if you're digging at the same time, you're getting deep pressure, which helps to override that light touch sense. So playing in the dirt and digging in the dirt will actually help to integrate that light touch sense. So if kids are not, getting enough of that outdoor play, that could become an issue where, let's say, they don't tolerate glue on their hands or are getting messy when they're eating their snack. So that's something to also pay attention to.
Such a good point.
So those are the top, like some things to think about. Outdoor play is good, but outdoor play in nature is even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think with so many things, it's that knowledge of how important it is that really motivates us to do things a little bit differently. And I know that in the book you talk about, from young babies onwards, we need to get children outdoors. Do you have any suggestions for, some children, any chance they get to be outdoors, they are 100% there. Other children, if that hasn't really been a regular part of their life as yet, they might be a bit more reluctant to get outside and explore in those ways. Do you have any tips or suggestions that might help us ease the transition?
Yes. So I have a good example of that, or a good way to think about it. If let's say you have children that are a little bit older and you listen to this podcast and you get excited, okay, I'm going to get my children outdoors, and, they're 8 or 9, let's say, they go outside. What's likely is going to happen is they're going to go outside if they don't have a lot of practice and say, well, all there is out here is dirt, sticks, rocks, leaves. And really what it takes is just practice and exposure to using those materials outside in different ways. For instance, let's use a stick as an example. And they go outside and they get bored next time and they sit in the dirt and they pick up a stick and they start digging with it. They realize, oh, this stick can be a tool. And so you're given an affordance. We call it a visual affordance. And then let's say there's a child over, they play with a child the week after, and that child's using sticks to build forts. And they go, oh, this stick has 2 affordances. I can use it for a tool and I can use it to build. And then maybe a third instance, they see someone, using it to fish. And so the more they get exposed to other children using these loose parts in different ways or materials that they can use in different ways, the more creative they're going to get as well. And so that's something that we use in Timber Nook is using multiple loose parts. So a stick, for example, you might come up, Claire, with 50 different ways to use a stick creatively, and I might come up with another 50 different ways, and we'll have some that overlap, but we will probably inspire each other to use it in different ways. So the more exposure you get to using those loose parts and being with other children and seeing them use it, the more ideas and more creative you're going to get. So it does take practice and exposure.
And friends sometimes.
and friends. And that's a huge piece to it. Like, so if, what I do with my own children is I invite friends over for the whole day. So we don't necessarily do play dates that are so popular over here, but we just, people drop their kids off at my house, and the kids, they just play and they inspire each other, and it makes a big difference.
I loved reading that in the book, because with some of my children's friends, we do that too, and others we don't. But I have to say, the whole day play dates, you do see them just get into such a rhythm with each other. And it's also nice for me to not have to do the small talk with the parents.
Yes, absolutely.
So in your book, you've got some tips for how we can tap into the benefits of movement within the classroom. Now, I assume you'd be a big advocate for taking learning outdoors where possible, but also for those times when we are within a fixed classroom space. Could you share a couple of ideas for us there?
Sure. So there's a huge trend right now with going, in classrooms that don't have necessarily desks and chairs. And so I think that that's been very helpful. But also, and also allowing them to maybe have multiple places where they are different ways to sit too. So they're not always sitting in a standard chair. Actually, the children at my children's school, they use different types of chairs. So they have rocking chairs, and they have standing desks, and they have all sorts of different options. But I think it's also great to have them go on their bellies and that sort of thing. But changing, because the gravity, if you're always sitting in the same position, gravity is going to put wear and tear on those ligaments, and those ligaments in the front are going to shorten, and then muscles that shouldn't lengthen are going to lengthen. So just changing things up is important. But yeah, I think that learning is best through meaningful play experiences anyway, especially for little children. So I feel like they really shouldn't be in chairs very much at all, and that it should be all play based. And so in that case, they're moving all day.
Yeah. Oh, I agree so much with you there. Has it been interesting having all of this information and then having a mum hat on and needing to choose where your children are going to school and maybe seeing some practices that you don't quite agree with?
Yeah, I think I had to learn to let go a little bit and not, and realize that my kids would be okay, but because there's only so much that's in your control, and to not worry about it neurotically that they're going to be totally impaired, but really to do what you can and what's in your power. And so I did a lot with educating the educators at my children's school, and they do come for Timber Nook, which has really influenced a lot of what they've done. But I also, when my kids get home from school, I make sure that they have plenty of time to play outdoors. And I am very careful about not overstructuring them with too many activities.
Yeah, likewise. And I think that can make such a difference. Yeah, life isn't perfect. And so it is just a case of making sure that we hone the environment that is within our control, just to make it conducive to the types of things that we've talked about today.
Right, definitely.
This has been such an enjoyable conversation, Angela. I feel like I'd be happy to talk for another hour or so, but I'd better let you get back to your evening. Well, firstly, I guess, thank you for writing such a rich and enjoyable book. Could you let everyone know again what it's called, where we can find the book, but also where we can find more from you online?
Absolutely. So it's called Balanced and Barefoot: How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident, and Capable Children. And you can find it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I think just about any major online book sales. You can find more about Timber Nook at www.timbernook.com. And most of the current articles that I write and research and what we're doing with Timber Nook, if you want to keep an eye on that, we're very active on Facebook. So if just follow Timber Nook on Facebook. In 2019, we're going to be bringing Timber Nook into schools, especially early childhood settings and preschools, to bring back that outdoor play. So keep an eye on that, because we'll be certifying schools to do it.
Oh, that sounds so exciting. And you know what, even for the schools that don't jump on board, it's just another voice saying, hey, this is important. Movement and nature are valuable.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you so much again, Angela.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
That's the end of this episode of the Thriving Children podcast. Until next time, be kind to yourself.
Thanks for listening to the Thriving Children podcast. For even more goodness, visit thrivingchildren.com.au.